Thank you, Chairman Hughes and committee, for inviting our testimony today. I'm Elizabeth Phillips from Dallas, Texas, where I grew up and still live today. For today's purposes, I'm a certified crime victim advocate and the sister of Trey, for whom this public safety bill is named. A special thank you to our tireless Senate sponsor, Vice Chair Paxton, who personally knows Kanakuk victims, even a former student of hers living under an NDA. I also want to thank Senator Parker, who represents my district, as well as the many senators and House reps who have co-sponsored and supported Trey's law this session. When HB 748 author Representative Leach presented Trey's law to the House floor a month ago, it passed unanimously and now has 17 co-sponsors. That vote and message of overwhelming support honors the tragic loss of my late brother and the countless survivors of child sexual abuse like him who didn't survive. Sadly, a lot of truth dies with people because of NDAs, and that only protects bad actors, which is contrary to public interest. To me, that is the point of Trey's law and this hearing today. Public safety, protecting children, prioritizing life, liberty, and the pursuit of healing and happiness. Trey wasn't able to heal. He was silenced to his grave by Kanakuk Ministries, a Christian summer camp and global enterprise based out of Southwest Missouri. Texas has historically been among their largest markets. My brother had many layers to his journey of injustice. First, he was groomed and abused from age 7 to 17 by a serial sex offender who was sentenced to 3 life terms in 2010. Trey was 20 years old when Pete Newman went to prison. Then Trey was forced by the civil statute of limitations in Texas to file his civil case against Kanakuk before the age of 23, while he was just trying to finish college and process unimaginable trauma amidst a Christian culture applauding Kanakuk and hailing its CEO, Joe White, as a spiritual hero. Trey's civil case ended with a settlement that included a restrictive NDA, making Kanakuk and its representatives another perpetrator of abuse in Trey's tragic and unnecessary demise. Institutional abuse on top of sexual abuse. I have actually learned more about the extent of my brother's abuse since his death than I knew in his life due to the NDA he was under. Trey told a therapist, "They will always control me and I'll never be free," before he died by suicide in August 2019 at age 28. He hesitated even to tell his story in confidential therapeutic settings for fear that Kanakuk would come after him again like they did an earlier John Doe. Since my family was public about Trey's abuse in his Dallas Morning News obituary, we've heard from so many other victim families with similar stories, some here today. Now that I know what I know, I'm trying to be a voice for Trey and countless other victims of sexual abuse and trafficking who are suffering in the shadows due to NDAs that restrict them from speaking in settings like this. If they could be here to testify without the threat of legal repercussions, there would be a line out the door. Some of the Kanakuk NDAs I've seen are multiple pages long. I'm going to share some short excerpts that have come to my attention by various survivors who are legally silenced to this day, so you can understand exactly the restrictions they live under into adulthood. Here's one. Plaintiff agrees to refrain from publicly criticizing, ridiculing, disparaging, or defaming any of the released parties or persons to any third party with or through any written or oral statement or image, including any statements made via websites, blogs, postings to the internet, emails, or social media at any time following the execution of this agreement. Another version states, the parties agree that neither party will make any written or oral statement portraying the other negatively. Any breach of this confidentiality clause shall constitute breach of this confidential settlement agreement and release, allowing the parties to seek damages for such breach. The releasers, the victims, have executed the same for the purposes and intents contained therein by their own free individual act and will. These are minor victims of childhood crimes. Until very recently, when some brave survivors broke their NDAs to speak with investigative journalists, dozens of Kanakuk victims believed that they were the only ones who had been abused there because the story barely reached the media. So when the floodgates opened and survivors coalesced around a petition asking Kanakuk to release victims from their NDAs, we garnered nearly 30,000 signatures in a matter of months. Kanakuk's initial response was a public statement and blatant lie that they do not use NDAs. Those of us who knew better called that out, so they said they do use NDAs, but it's only at the request of the victims. Survivors called out that lie, and Kanakuk changed their tune again, admitting in an open letter from Joe White that they use NDAs, but it's their insurance company that makes them do it, and in order to avoid repercussions, victims should not disclose settlement terms. Kanakuk won't come clean, and we're not giving them any more chances. With your help, we're going to change the law. The law on NDAs must be clarified because we cannot trust institutions to do the right thing. Facts About Kanakuk, an advocacy group launched by survivors in 2021, has since received continuous tips with hundreds of abuse allegations against more than 68 unique perpetrators associated with Kanakuk dating from 1958 to today. We learned about a new one just last week. The same family has been at the helm of Kanakuk throughout, while victims have been lawfully hushed by state-sanctioned NDAs Kanakuk and its insurers demanded behind closed doors with intimidating attorneys. That is exactly what led my brother to a psychotic break and a downward spiral thereafter. So for my family, it's no exaggeration for me to claim this as a matter of life and death. When you take someone's voice away, especially a child's, you take away their most linear path to healing. When you muzzle victims, kids, college kids, survivors of any age, it conceals important information from the public domain. Trey's law should be a welcomed and minimum measure of justice so that future sexual assault victims do not have my brother's outcome. There's a quote that says, "Shame dies when stories are told in safe places." Tennessee made itself safer in 2018 when they became the first state to pass a bill prohibiting NDAs in civil child sexual abuse cases. Missouri is one signature away from doing the same. Trey's law has passed the General Assembly there and is on the governor's desk. And 18 states, along with US Congress, have clarified the NDA issue for adult survivors of sexual assault. It's time we expand that to include children, and Texas can be a leader on this. Because NDAs have protected powerful people and institutions for a long time, there is widespread misinformation claiming that NDAs are actually in the best interest of survivors. I hope it is already clear to you that this is not the case, but I'm happy to clear up any misconceptions if there are questions. So to wrap this up, my focus and work is on the prevention of institutional child sexual abuse. So I support both bills that give victims their voices back. But I must emphasize that HB 748 is the strongest version of Trey's law, with 0 no votes in the other chamber, and Texas can decide whether to lead or follow. I am myself a survivor of a sexual assault in college. And that's the first time I'm saying this publicly. I was a college kid when I endured that. So I personally feel strongly that the abuse of NDAs in any civil cases pertaining to sexual assault should be banned by law, and whomever opposes that has something to hide. NDAs, when weaponized in sexual assault cases, only protect bad actors. My request to this committee is whichever version you decide to go with, put that in the House bill and vote the House bill out promptly so we have a chance to get this to the governor's desk by deadline this session. I'm asking my home state to pass Trey's law this session as an urgent matter of public safety. There have been 17 suicides associated with Kanakuk abuse known to date. I know Texas stands on the side of life. All emotion aside, this is just good policy. NDAs are for trade secrets, not trauma secrets. Full stop. Thank you for hearing me and the brave witnesses to follow. I'm prepared to take any questions.
My name is Cindy Clemsh, and I am going to share my testimony with you. Thank you so much for having me and including me in this opportunity to change our laws and protect children. I grew up in Hominy, Oklahoma, and I was groomed and abused beginning at the age of 12 and continued for 4 more years. I finally told someone when I was 17 years old. Robert Morris was a traveling evangelist at the time from Texas, and later became the founding pastor of Gateway Church in Southlake, Texas. He and his wife and children stayed in our home when he was preaching at my church. They quickly became family friends, people my parents and others in my community trusted. My abuse started on Christmas night, December 25th, 1982, when I was 12 years old. That was the night he made the premeditated decision to violate and defile my innocence and purity. I want to be clear so you understand exactly what we are talking about. This man, trusted by so many as a preacher of God's word, took advantage of a vulnerable child. I was wearing my favorite pink pajamas with bloomers. He touched me in a way that under Oklahoma law is classified as rape by instrumentation. The word rape often brings to mind brutality, but these predators are calculated. They don't just groom the child, they groom the parents and others around them to gain access. The abuse is often subtle, gentle, not to protect the child, but to keep the child confused and quiet. When Robert finished his first assault on me, the very first thing he said to me, and I quote, "You can never tell anyone because it will ruin everything." This continued countless times over the next 4 years until I finally told someone in March of 1987. Sadly, when I did tell, it seemed as though Robert was right. It did ruin everything in my world. Friendships ended, marriages of mutual family friends fell apart. My relationships with others changed instantly. And at just 17 years old, I thought it was all my fault. As I began the lifelong journey of dealing with the aftermath of child sexual abuse, my life seemed to attract more shame, while Robert's attracted more fame. I was in and out of marriages, spent over a decade in counseling, and tried to find healing through various churches and seminars. I was searching for understanding, for peace, and for forgiveness. By 2007, 20 years after the abuse ended, I realized I could potentially receive some form of financial restitution. My attorney sent a demand letter for $50,000, just enough to cover the cost of counseling. His attorney responded not with compassion, but with a letter accusing me, a 12-year-old child at the time, of pursuing him. They countered with $25,000, but only if I signed a non-disclosure agreement. I was 37 years old at that time. I refused. There was no way I would ever sign something stating I could never speak about my own life. Had I agreed to that NDA, Robert would have continued to have power over me. Instead, I kept telling people, I kept seeking truth, and I kept healing. Because I refused to sign that NDA at 37, I am able to sit here today at 55 years old and share my story in hopes of helping others. In March of this year, March 12th of 2025, my abuser was indicted by the Oklahoma grand jury on 5 counts of lewd acts with a child. This is what happens when survivors are not silenced. NDAs may be presented as legal formalities, but in cases like mine, they are tools that continue the abuse. They protect the abuser and keep victims in shame. They prevent the children from being protected, and they make it harder to stop abuse from happening again. The only way to have a chance at ending child sexual abuse is to tell the truth, to speak it, to share it, and to expose it. When NDAs are used to silence victims, we are not protecting families, we are protecting the people destroying them. So I leave you with this. Anyone who doesn't support this bill or waters it down or prevents it from being passed, we should be asking, who are they trying to protect and why?
Thank you, committee, for having me. My name is Joe Allercon. I am from Amarillo, Texas, and I am definitely in support of these bills, especially HB 748, Trey's law. I come as a father to a victim. My son Ashton. I told somebody one time that as we prepare for testimonies like this, that it comes at a price. That in order for us to change the future, we have to go back to our past. And the past is hurtful. The past is hard to deal with and it's hard to recognize. But the reality is that those of us who do have voice, I feel like we have a responsibility and an opportunity to speak for those who do not have their voice. I'm here today because of my son, Ashton. He is a survivor and one of countless victims of Pete Newman and the leadership of Kennecott camps, including Joe White. Pete Newman was a serial predator at Kennecott camps and was allowed to abuse children for over a decade. And he was enabled by people in power, men like Joe White, the founder of Kennecott. I know this not from hearsay, but from firsthand evidence. I sued Kennecott. I possess Pete Newman's personnel files. I have the video depositions of Joe White, Doug Goodwin, and others trying to explain and justify why they let the abuse continue. In one of those depositions, Joe White, he said, "The reports of abuse were drops in a cascade of good." That is how he described the abuse of my son. A drop, a casualty, something small and forgettable in the face of all the good they believed that they were doing. How sick is that? After learning of Ashton's abuse, my family's soul folks became his healing. Ashton was once a joyful, radiant young man, full of light. That light was dimmed that day by Pete Newman whenever he targeted my son. And what haunts us is knowing his abuse could have been prevented. What many don't understand is that the abuse doesn't stop with the victim. It ripples through the entire family. Three years ago, I lost my son, Preston, Ashton's younger brother. Preston carried his brother's pain, his anxiety and depression in silence. My son Preston did not recover from his anxiety and sadness. One of my most treasured memories of Ashton, he was just 4 years old, gently carrying his little baby brother Preston into our room one night because he was worried about him. From that moment, I knew Ashton had just met his best friend and his little brother. And Preston did not survive it. Why am I here today? Because I can. Because my family refused to sign an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement. We refused to be silent. However, that decision came at a steep price. After we refused to sign the NDA, Kennecott came after us, came after me personally. They filed motion after motion in federal courts attempting to sanction me personally, to force us into silence, to bury the truth beneath legal threats and financial ruin. They even tried to make us pay over $20,000 in their legal fees. They were relentless, and Joe White was very intentional about making sure that we would never be able to tell our story. But Judge Fish repeatedly ruled in our favor. Still, their lawyers kept coming, twisting the narrative, just like Joe White did when he allowed Pete Newman to prey on children. So I ask you, should any family have to go through that just to protect their child? Should victims have the right? Should victims have to fight not only their trauma, but also institutions and lawyers bent on silencing them? Should any family and victims be treated with so much disrespect and their abuse be treated like a business deal? No. Victims and families should be supported so that healing can take place. I stand here today not just for my son Ashton and not just for my son Preston. I stand for the victims of the future, children who, as of today, have not been abused. Let me say that again. I stand for the victims of the future, children who, as of today, have not been abused. That is a sobering reality. Just saying that breaks my heart. Some of them will become addicts, many will become depressed, and some will not make it. You have the power right now to pass a law that protects their voice, a law that ensures NDAs cannot be used to cover up abuse. A law that says, in Texas, predators and the people who protect them will not be shielded by secrecy. In closing, I speak to you not only as a grieving father, but also as someone who has stood up to the institution. I speak to you as a man who still believes in justice. In a minute, you're going to be able to hear from my son, Ashton. You're going to hear from a graduate of Columbia Dental School in New York City, a captain in the United States Air Force who is currently stationed in Misawa, Japan, fighting for my freedom and your freedom. He is living proof that healing is possible when victims are given their voice. My son is a survivor, a warrior, and a light in this world only because he refused to be silent. Please pass HB 748. Protect our children, honor our families, and ensure that no more light is stolen in the name of justice. In the name of silence. Thank you.
Most of you have already heard my story, so I'll keep this a little short. My name is Joseph Cleveland, and I live in Huntsville, Texas. My senator is Senator Schwartner on this committee. In 2004, at the age of 15, I was introduced to a man who was a pedophile. This man had begun grooming me and would eventually begin molesting me. This happened once or twice for the rest of high school and continued until I was the age of 24. Little did I know, this man was already working alongside a college ministry called Chi Alpha and the Assemblies of God Church for at least 2 decades and had already molested other boys, for which he had served 90 days in an Alaska jail for that. Pastors in our ministry tried to convince students, many of whom were also victims, to write letters of lenience on behalf of the survivor, on behalf of the abuser. When I was abused in 2005, the statute of limitations in Texas at the time were until the age of 23. At the age of 23, I was still being molested by this man. For a significant amount of time, the leadership in the Assembly of God, which was the denomination I had been a part of, knew that this man was a registered sex offender, did not take the needed steps to rid our ministries of him. I was one of the first victims to come publicly forward in 2023, and for nearly 20 years, I had told no one, not even my wife, who is here. Myself and 5 friends, some of them even pastors in the Assembly of God and other victims, started to call our friends, figuring that there had, of course, been other men who had been abused. We heard for about 6 months dozens of stories, and we ended up finding over 40 victims, most of which have no intention of ever coming forward. They just want to move on with their lives and, move on in peace. The majority of these men also will never see justice because they were technically adults when it happened because they were college students. We then all watched in horror as NDAs were used to insulate the organizational leadership, to cover themselves, to use NDAs as a fog of ignorance to hide behind it. Because of this, justice has not been served in a lot of cases. Since then, the Assemblies of God has even tried to dismiss valid civil claims of negligence, has sidelined victims like myself and others in the investigation process, and have still even tried to use NDAs against minor victims, who are still minors to this day. My wife and I have a rule in our house with our kids. No secrets. The night before the House Committee meeting for Trey's Law, I was talking to my 8-year-old daughter in kid language, explaining to her the process of NDAs. And she said, if you keep it secret, doesn't that bad person keep hurting children? And she's 100% right. An 8-year-old understands that. My request today is, of course, that we pass Trey's Law for children and adults, because I am in both of those categories. That this bill would allow the accountability and justice to take place, that it will not allow organizations and leaders to plead agnosticism in the face of these unspeakable crimes. Thank you, committee.
And thank you for your testimony. We thank each of you, and we're going to have some questions for you. So if you don't mind staying with us and helping us get the full picture. Senator Paxton, you have the panel.